Thank you, Pew Pew, for the 300 biddies. Thank you for that. So yeah, Resident Evil 8. As a refresher, we rated Resident Evil 7 quite high. We gave it a 9 overall. And this game felt like an improvement over 7 in just about every way, for me personally. Which is interesting because that makes me really glad that we played 7 first, right? Because if we'd have played 8 and then we'd gone back to 7, 7 would have felt like a downgrade. But because we played 7 first and we fully appreciated it in its context, we can now grade 8 after having played 7, which I'm glad that we did for sure. So, first thing we talk about on the reviews, as a refresher, is the story. And then we go into gameplay, and then we give an overall. So, the story of Resident Evil 8. No, you're not supposed to be seeing the chart at the moment. So the story of 8. I feel like the story of 8 was better than 7 in a lot of ways. You know, 7 didn't have just like a ton of story on the outset because you were trying to figure out sort of what was going on. So you spent most of the game in 7 not really knowing what was going on. You just kind of like looking for your wife, and everybody's kind of, you know, mutated in these weird ways, and these hillbillies in this family are attacking you and you don't really know why. You know, you spend most of the game kind of in the dark until kind of close to the end. Whereas this one, you come in knowing what the virus / the mold is. You know who Ethan is, you know who Mia is, you know, you have a lot of more context. And when you come to the village, you don't fully understand all the workings of what's going on, but you do figure it out relatively quickly because you already know the properties of the mold. They talk about early on that this place seems to be the origin of the mold, based on some papers that you found. And they set up the characters, I'd say, in this one probably even better in a lot of ways than they did the characters in the first one. Each individual, like, sort of lord or boss character, or whatever you want to call them, had very unique areas. They had a very unique personality. They had cool character traits. They had different powers. Like, they were mostly set up pretty well and introduced pretty well, and you had like a good familiarity with them for the most part, which I thought was cool. I liked how unique they were and how they had their own, like, sort of like different areas and stuff like that. I thought that was really well done. As far as like the overall story goes of, you know, Ethan's journey to recover Rose and, you know, all that kind of stuff, it was solid again for what it was. Much like Resident Evil 7, these are not games that are necessarily super heavy on story, but there's enough there to keep you interested and keep you going. And I feel like, again, they did a pretty good job of smattering through little, like, pieces of paper and little bits of side extra lore that you could find and stuff like that without being overwhelming, as some games do. As I mentioned in the RE7 review, I feel like some games can get overwhelming with the amount of extra reading and menu navigation and stuff that they expect you to do to get, like, the whole story. Resident Evil rides a good line on that, where they give you, like, enough that you feel like exploration is rewarded and you get more information, but it doesn't try to overwhelm you and say, like, sit here and read for hours and hours and hours to get the fullness of our story. I like that. I do appreciate that. I like deep lore as well, but, like, I would rather more of that lore be in the actual game rather than having to sit there and read a bunch of dialogues over and over and over again to get everything, you know, to play menu navigation for lore. So in that sense, I got to give Capcom, I got to give Resident Evil a lot of props. So I gave the story of Resident Evil 7 an 8. And within the context of this genre and everything, I feel like it's only fair to give this one a 9, because it is an improvement over 7, just straight up. So I think it deserves the point bump, up to a 9 for an FPS horror storyline. You know, like it's good. I am a little bit biased as well at the same time because I love the setting. I love the idea of most of what they were playing with. It's a lot of stuff that appealed to me very directly. I love vampires. I like werewolves and you know what they call lichens sometimes. I liked the Heisenberg dude with his, like, you know, metal manipulation powers. Like, even the creepy little girl that we were, you know, as much as we were kind of like calling her Skog as a joke, even she was a really cool character. Like, it was very like almost like World of Darkness kind of characters and world setting. So it appealed to me very much directly. So even if I didn't think the story or the characters or whatever were as good as I do, I still think it still like appeals to me like kind of directly. So I get a little bit of a bias there. Even Snotfish Boy was kind of a cool character because he was so different from all the other ones. You know, he was kind of weaker and kind of pathetic, and you know, he was like very worshipful towards Miranda in a totally different way. You know, like each character really had these different personalities, which was good. You know, the fish dude was kind of pathetic. The vampire chick was kind of, you know, self-involved, thought she was the favorite. The little creepy little doll girl kind of just did her own thing. She was very like whatever the fuck. She wasn't like super obsessed with Miranda, which was kind of cool. And then the Heisenberg character sort of rebelled against her, which was also kind of cool. He really was not a big fan of her and wanted to usurp her from the very beginning. So I like that. I like that variety of the characters for sure. So that brings us to gameplay, which again, everything here was sort of a step up from Resident Evil 7, I thought. Things I want to highlight specifically, the fact that they added the ability to just melee a box without even having to pull out your knife was a nice touch. That's a nice quality of life thing. That was very nice. The weapon upgrade system was nice. Being able to find parts and implement those into the weapons along with the shop was cool. The money system was... I didn't hate the money system, and the merchant dude was kind of cool. I think my only real complaint with that whole thing was the fact that it felt much more difficult to find like boxes and stuff to store things in, which was sort of an odd deal because you felt like you had them all over the place in the first game. And then this one, like, I'd want to put some stuff in the box and I couldn't find one. So either like I'm completely missing them or they were like actually just not around very much because I don't remember seeing them. I thought there should have been one at the merchant dude. That just kind of made sense. There's a save point there, everything else. There's no box. I'm not really sure about that. The little ball puzzles were pretty cool. You know, rotating them around and you know, moving the ball through them. They were kind of cool. They were a little like tacked on feeling, considering they didn't do much other than give you like a little bit of extra money. But they were still cool. They were a cool concept. Fun to play around with. The weapons all felt better than 7. The crafting change was an interesting one. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about it quite yet. Like, on one hand, it worked. It was serviceable. But on the other hand, like, it also felt like you didn't need to craft as much in this one as you did in 7. So it kind of felt like the crafting system like took more of a backseat role in this one. Maybe that's what they intended for it to do, because maybe a bunch of people played 7 and didn't like the crafting system the way that it was, or something like that. I'm not sure, but the crafting system sort of ended up in a weird place in this one where it was like sort of not as important as it was in 7, but I liked the fact that it had its own sort of inventory. Though the UI for it was a little... It could have been a little bit better. But ultimately it worked. They also made the interesting decision to not make damage as noticeable on the screen. In 7, you got hit like one time and you had like blood all around the outside of the screen, and then it just gets progressively worse and worse. This one really didn't do that. It just kind of had your little life bar that would flash a little bit, and you'd have to kind of pay attention to it, which was on one hand more immersive because you didn't like focus on your health as much, but on the other hand, it also just didn't give you the greatest impression that you were damaged or you were close to death sometimes. There wasn't a whole lot of instances where I died as a result of that, like being like, oh shit, I didn't know I was about to die. So I guess it wasn't like a big problem, but it sort of felt a little bit weird that there wasn't like a bigger indicator of like, you're about to fucking die, you should probably heal. But ultimately it didn't like detract from it too much, so it is what it is on that regard. I don't think it's enough to like dock a point or anything like that. It just something I notated. Most of the other things I would sort of point out are sort of minor by comparison. Like, I liked that there was a good weapon variety, but it was also like the weapon variety wasn't too distinctive at the same time. Like, the difference between the pistol we got later and the pistol we had at the beginning of the game was just like this one did a little more damage and this one had a little more like ammo capacity. It wasn't like a huge difference between them. They didn't play dramatically differently. Same thing with like the shotguns, right? Like the first shotgun you had, I used it for the whole game because the next shotgun we got did a little more damage, but it wasn't a significant enough change on some of the other factors that it felt like swapping out for it was like significant. That's how it felt for a lot of the weapons, and then like the sniper rifle is just like, you know, sniper rifle, whatever. I thought they were better weapons than the first game for the most part, but they also just didn't like differentiate like a ton. The only a couple of weapons stood out as being like distinctly different than the rest. One kind of being the Magnum, which you really didn't get to use much at all because the Magnum ammo was super rare, and they never gave you the ability to like craft it or anything. So it really felt like this weapon that was only useful for bosses because you really had to baby that ammo. So like we only used it like twice, I think, in the whole game practically, which is always kind of an odd one to me, you know, to put a weapon in the game that you just like never use. But you know, it is what it is. So overall, I think I'm trying to think if there's anything else that like dramatically stands out. Like I already kind of talked about it a few times that I wish you could melee more. I wish melee played a bigger role. I felt like that in Resident Evil 7, and I definitely felt it in Resident Evil 8, where like melee just like could use a little more like fleshing out. Like I think it could, like, obviously we're not looking for like chivalry level melee in a Resident Evil game, but it seemed like an odd choice to have all these guys running around with like these cool melee weapons, and then you don't even get to use any of them, and you never like utilize melee, you know. And like they did a decent job with the melee in the Resident Evil 7 DLC, where you play Punchy McPuncherson, which was like a cool part, even though his melee was obviously completely overpowered, and that was kind of the point. But like it showed that like they took out enough time to like add a sort of melee system to the game. So I'm just like wondering, like, why not go ahead and just like allow me to have the option to do a little more melee, you know? It felt like that with Horizon Zero Dawn as well, as like an interesting comparison. Horizon Zero Dawn had melee, but like you never really got to do much with it in terms of upgrading it past the base values. I would have liked to have seen more melee in a game like that too. It just feels like melee isn't that hard, and if you've already got like enough of that there already to be using the knife and stuff like that, like just flesh it out just a little bit more. Doesn't have to be crazy, just like make it like a functional part of the game that you can actually utilize more often. I know it's possible to do melee knife only run in the game, as Annie has pointed out several times. I think you beat both games doing melee only. but obviously the reason why that would suck is because you don't really do much with the melee. Like you just kind of run at them and slash a little bit. So I would like to see a little bit more to it, personally, a little bit more interesting. But that's not the focus of the game, so I'm not gonna like dock points for that. That's just like a personal preference. So I'm gonna give the gameplay a 9 because I feel like it held up to everything that the gameplay was good in 7, and then also improved upon it. But it's not flawless. It's not like everything worked with 0 issues, but it's quite good. Quite good. Which really brings us down to the last category, which is the overall. Which again, I think puts it at a solid 9 overall. I think it gets a 9 across the board, which matches it up with Resident Evil 7. I think this game did not represent a downgrade from 7 in any kind of way. I think it was just an upgrade all the way around. The story was better, the combat was better, the weapons were better, the upgrade system is better. Pretty much everything was better. I even liked a lot of the changes on the enemy variety and the way that they worked and stuff like that. I mean, in 7, you fought those slime monster thingies like so much that they really felt like they were the only enemy in the whole game, like 90% of the time. This one had the Lycans, it had the zombie guys, it had the variations on those, it had the crazy mechanical creations in Heisenberg's, thingamabobber. It had a good amount of variety of creatures, and they even mixed up the gameplay a bit where there was harder, more combat heavy sections like Heisenberg's level, and then there was more puzzling sections like Skog the Evil Dollmaker's level, and I like that as well. I think that they did a good job of like mixing it up and not forcing you to feel like you just fall into a rhythm of doing the same thing the whole time. And those bat enemies, fuck those guys, hated those things. But like, yeah, they had the bat. I don't even know how you melee kill the bat things. That sounds like probably the worst experience in the whole game, is trying to melee down those bat creatures. That doesn't sound fun at all. So yeah, all of it was good though. All of it was fun. Solid game overall, 9 out of 10. As far as horror games go, I feel like Resident Evil sort of represents the top of the mountain in a lot of cases. They're the most polished AAA title type horror games that come out. So it's not really surprising that I'm enjoying these as much as I am. I don't feel like these represent like a huge like dip into the horror genre per se. I feel like they're very much like mainstream games, even though horror is sort of the box that they occupy. But it's not like you have to go very far down the rabbit hole of horror to play Resident Evil or enjoy it. So that's kind of why we started with these. These are the games I wanted to play the most, and they also sort of are the most mainstream titles. So that's the end of Resident Evil 8. There is no real DLC for it of note. Obviously, the game didn't come out that long ago. So we may end up revisiting it on the stream in the future if excuse me, if more story DLC does come out for it.